Hello, hello, adventurers, and welcome back to the Dragon's Lair. Today we will be discussing the last portion of the Avatar The Last Airbender series, the animals. So, let's jump right into it, shall we? Starting off with, well, the first animal of the series that we meet, Appa. He is a big, flying bison. As such, his strength is going to be relatively high, somewhere around 22, 24, a little higher even. Keeping in mind that animal stats can reach up to 30, as per D&D 5e rules. So there are a few options there. Moving into his dexterity, it's going to be relatively low, right? But not negatives. He is big, so he's going to be easier to hit. But he's seen throughout the series, I guess, spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1, we should be good. Seen throughout the series, dodging different strikes or different attacks that are flung at him, usually airborne attacks. So because of that, I'm going to put his dexterity at around 10 to 12, just because he's not negative. He's able to dodge strikes, but he is easy to hit, keeping his AC in mind. So moving into Constitution, I'm going to put his Constitution at relatively high because a giant flying bison would be able to, and in his case does, take quite a few hits. So, again, low to mid 20s. 22, 24, maybe even 26, depending on your take on Appa. Into the mental stats, intelligence and wisdom are going to be relatively low. I'm saying 2 to 4, just because that's the average sort of mental stats for an animal. And there's nothing that we're given that would prove Appa anything different from that. Into charisma, the way I look at charisma is a little different from like the normal human or PC way of looking at charisma. You've got to look at the animal's, we'll call it appeal factor, which is essentially how people perceive it, right? For Appa, he is perceived as a rather intimidating animal. However, to a select few people, he could appear relatively cute. So we are putting his charisma at somewhere around 6, give or take. Maybe 4, maybe 8, your call. So because of that, his AC is going to be somewhere around 10 to 11, depending on which of the two stats you chose for him. His hit points, this is kind of up in the air. Flying bison, air. Chill wasn't expecting that. But, yeah, it's going to be a little on your call. You could do sort of an average of the max you could have divided by 2, which is the general average you get. So somewhere around 80s. Or you could do 20 d10s plus his Constitution. Yes, Constitution. That's your call. Moving into... Well, that's for HP. I don't know if I...
Flying speed.
Yes. Flying bison has a flying speed. Yes. Makes sense. 50. Here's why. He has a relatively strong tail that he uses to push himself off and then can continue propelling himself forward. But he is a large bison. Add the fact that he's kind of the pack mule of the group, and he's slowed down very quickly. So 50 feet per 6 seconds was my go-to. That also kind of keeps it in balance with other flying animals within D&D. Thank you. Anything else I've missed? Cool. Moving into Momo. As for his strength, he is a relatively small animal, so I'm going to put it at low, somewhere around 2 to 4. Just because he's not the strongest, but, I mean, he's not necessarily weak for what he is. But, you know, compared to something like Appa, he's not strong. Dexterity, though, he would be a lot better off than Appa would be. So I'm putting his dexterity, Momo's dexterity, at 26, 28, maybe even 30. Because he's constantly flying around, that's how he dodges strikes, and he's small, so he would be relatively hard to hit because of it. Into Constitution, there's nothing saying that he can't take a hit, but at the same point in time, we don't have any information as to he's very good at essentially tanking attacks. So I'm putting his constitution at 10. Neither good nor bad. Into the mental stats. Momo at least tries to be intelligent. So, spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1. We should be good. I should have paused a little bit longer on the countdown, but this has made up for it. So, as seen when Katara and Sokka are sick, he tries to be intelligent. Now, he doesn't necessarily work, right? They don't get the message across to him, and he's not able to get what they need, but he tries. So I'm going to put his intelligence at 6 because he's able to understand some things, and as seen on the Drill Tank episode when Aang tells him to get out of the area when he and Azula are fighting, he's able to understand some specific, like, sentences that aren't his trained flying word, unlike Appa. But on a scale of, like, actual intelligence and being able to understand what's going on, he's pretty comparable to a barbarian. So wasn't expecting that either. So somewhere around 6 for his intelligence. Wisdom, I'm going to put at normal animal stat, which is 2 to 4, relatively low. Charisma, as I mentioned, the appeal factor. Momo quite often has a lot of people that like him right off the beginning. So I'm going to put his charisma at minimum around 8. I would be more inclined personally to put it somewhere on the 12 to 14 side of things. Just because of how many people like him, he doesn't really ever seem to make any explicit enemies aside from the people that are already enemies with the gang, obviously speaking. AC, because of his dexterity, is going to be relatively high. Somewhere even around 20, if you went with 30 for his stat. Aside from that, his HP, I went for 44 plus Constitution. I almost said Charisma again. Constitution. 44 plus Constitution. This kind of keeping in mind that he is a relatively small animal and wouldn't be able to take a ton of hits over a long period of time. But his dexterity makes up for the low amount of HP. Flying speed. I'm putting his flying speed at 50 again because he's smaller, so he would be able to move a lot faster. However, he doesn't have as much lift speed as Appa does. So, kind of balances out, and their flying speed would be about similar. This scene, of course, in the show, and the number being fair for D&D flying speeds. Now we move into a few more unconventional animals. Starting off with something that we see and are able to put into D&D, the badger mole. Now, it is worth noting that the badger moles would be blind, so there is that. They would have to have some sort of blind sight, as we see with Toph. Aside from that, they're going to be very strong. I'm saying somewhere around 24, 26 maybe. Because they push the dirt out of the way, they're able to tunnel, that sort of thing. And their constitution is going to match, because they are big animals. So it would be assumable that they would be able to take hits. That being said, their dexterity is going to be relatively low. First off, they're blind, so they can't dodge strikes very easily. Second, they are big animals. So I know this was a little out of order from the natural strength dex const, but it was the same number, so yeah. Dexterity I'm going to put at somewhere around 4 to 6. Because they're big animals. They can't dodge, they can't see. That's about that. Mental stats are kind of the average animal mental stats. So you have intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. I'm placing it all at somewhere around 2 to 6. Because they were intelligent enough to, well, spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1. Should be good. They were intelligent enough to teach Toph how to bend and how to essentially see, but we don't know that there was any real communication between them. They just kind of did their thing, and she copied the movements. Charisma, we don't really know a whole lot. I mean, Toph's perception of them is good, but aside from that, I don't know if anyone really knows about them much. aside from the episode where they helped the people out of the secret tunnel. But I think they were too out of their minds to notice the Badger moles. So there is that. For what it is, their charisma is good. People perceive them well, but they're not expressly cute, and the vast majority of people don't really have any opinion on them. They don't know about them as much as something like Momo and Appa when they're seen. So there is that. Missing HP and AC.
Mhm.
AC would be relatively low. As I mentioned, they'd be easy to hit. HP, I would put it at something similar to Appa's, where it's somewhere around 20 D10s plus Constitution, because they are, I believe, bigger than Appa when you look at it pound for pound. So they would be able to take quite a bit and probably have more health. For their average, I would probably go around 120 plus Const instead of the 80 that I said for Appa. Moving into a few other things. That's the last full-blown animal that we have. Now we move into things that are bits and pieces, just kind of what we've gathered from the show. We have the lizards that Ty Lee and May ride at one point in time. There are giant lizards in D&D, so those were already done. That's why it's not a full-blown animal. The only difference that I saw was the water movement speed. And the way I kind of did that was if they expend their full turn, like their full movement speed, running across water for that turn, they can run on water. Right? So they have to have usually it's 10 plus feet of movement for like running and jumping. So if they have that 10 plus feet of movement and they're already going at like full speed and they continue for the rest of their turn on the water, they can continue to run on water. From there, once they're on water, they have to expend their full turn's movement speed running on the water in a singular direction. So you can't be running one way and then stop to turn and run the other. That would kind of stop the momentum, which would cease their ability to run on water, if that makes sense. However, I would allow angled turns, just not full stop and turning in a different direction. So, for instance, northeast and northwest, you could kind of branch off and turn that way, but you couldn't go north to straight east for cardinal direction implementation. Dragons are also in the show, but those are already in D&D. It's in the name. We'd be a little disappointed if they weren't in D&D already. The only real difference, aside from pure aesthetics of the dragon, is that dragons in the show will form bonds with humans, sometimes even to the point of giving up the dragon's life itself to protect their human, and that they show affection by licking people. Do with that information what you will. Aside from that, we know normal hawks are used as messenger birds, at least in the Fire Nation. Rest in peace, Hawkeye. We have bears as a normal, like, real-world animal. Those are rare in the show, apparently. There are a number of mixed animals, but we don't know a whole lot about them aside from the turtle duck. Really cute animal. Although I don't think we ever really see them walk. If they are, they're kind of in the corner of one of the scenes, and they're not the main focus. So, you know, those are small creatures. They'd be relatively hard to hit, so higher dexterity. Relatively low to middling strength because they're turtles and ducks, and neither of those animals stick out to me as being able to push objects for a very long distance, especially given their size of how small they are. Constitution, middling. Mental stats, low. Just to give you an idea. HP for turtle ducks, I would put somewhere around 2d4 plus const. So, just to give you an idea. But that is all I have for you fine adventurers today, and for this series. So, be on the lookout for my next series, a hint to which will be the initials are letters that I've used quite a bit in this series, or in this episode rather. This episode specifically. So, leave a comment down below with what you think that hint means. I'm interested to see your interpretation of it. Aside from that, if you can't possibly wait until my next video, which will start the new series, feel free to come join my Discord or come hang out on Twitch. Other than that, I will catch you all later.